I'm surprised a little bit that on the first day when my mustache was pointed out that he didn't also say, "Oh, I bet you ride a bicycle too, don't you?" Because I'm here to talk to you just about bicycle use. I hope that what I can bring to the conversation that has happened at this symposium is specifically how behavior change can affect bicycle use and how we can sort of use these strategies around the ideas of active transportation when we are in a difficult position and don't have a lot of money and don't have a lot of infrastructure to do so. So the Toronto Cycling Think and Do Tank is where Dr. Beth Savin, who unfortunately couldn't be here, and myself do our work. We are a small research organization out of the University of Toronto, specifically out of the city centre. We're partnership-based, so we work with a lot of community partners to help figure out the best way to approach this work within Toronto as a case study. For you, coming here as a Canadian, you might think that we have a lot of support for cycling in Canada. The World Health Organization actually just this week published a report saying that Canada is lagging substantially behind other nations in terms of supporting safe streets for pedestrians and cyclists. And that's a really good framework to understand where our work comes in. Because what we are tasked with doing in understanding Toronto specifically is understanding why we've seen such a large increase in ridership in downtown Toronto when over the past couple of years we've seen a net loss in bicycle infrastructure in that specific environment. So obviously there's a lot of other things that are going on that are supporting cyclists, supporting people who don't really understand the urban environment and how it reacts to cyclists, and getting them on their bicycles in the end. So that was our task, understanding the social infrastructure, using that as a platform then to execute further behavior change within Toronto. So I'll try and be really brief. Again, this actually is Beth Savin's presentation and she was ill, but hopefully that will help me be quick because it's not my presentation. I'll give you a bit of the background on Toronto specifically as a case study. I will then give you a bit of a description on the specific toolkit that we're developing around these issues to accelerate cycling adoption. And I urge you all to go to our website, torontocycling.org, where this toolkit that offers strategies at each level of behavior change will be available. So I'm going to discuss understanding traveling patterns in Toronto across different modes, the development of the cycling toolkit, and then the refining specifically of the toolkit for retail, for-profit bike shops, and not-for-profit repair shops as well. So these entry points that we often overlook that provide social infrastructure to cyclists. And then I'm going to talk about the further directions that we have. So I have given you a little bit of an introduction to these ideas right here. We're here to understand where the lessons from the field of behavior change can be applied to cycling adoption for transportation. We're here to hasten mode shift, to enhance the local economy in these environments that we're targeting. And then we're also looking to specifically fill the gap in the literature where there isn't a lot of quality, rigorous, evidence-based study or clear metrics even for studying cycling specifically. And at the bottom here, it showcases some of the amazing partners that we work with. TCAT specifically is an organization in Toronto that advocates for complete streets. We work with 880 Cities, which is an organization, an NGO that's based on the premise that a city should be accessible for people of the ages 8 to 80. We also work with, again, for-profit enterprises at the wholesale level in the bicycle industry and at the retail level. And then we are partnering with media publications that focus on public spaces to try and get our message out across different streams. So from the work of Lake Sagaris, who is a partner with us at the organization, she's broken down the cycling into various drivers, and that includes behavior, physical infrastructure, and then the urban rules and processes, which all feed into each other to create the current status of behavior and bicycle use. So up till now, a lot of the focus of cities has really been on physical infrastructure and making these changes at that level to support safe cycling and to get people on their bicycles and to choose cycling over car use. Where we come in is specifically around the psychological elements of behavior change and the social elements that I mentioned. If we look at this graph, it represents a bunch of cities across North America and shows from the mid-90s till 2009 the drastic increases in cycling. And what I want you to look at is actually the third one right there, which is Toronto, which is showing quite a bit of an increase, but it's only going up till 2006. I don't have solid data to show you, but if you were on the roads in Toronto in 2006 and got a sense for how many cyclists there has been an astronomical boom in the past few years. And again, this is with a net loss in bicycle lanes and safe infrastructure. So some of our strategies for approaching this issue of social infrastructure was to understand specifically what are the demographics of these people that are riding bikes in Toronto. Who are these cyclists? And then what's the physical qualities of their trips? What kind of trips are they taking? Where are they going? How long are they? We wanted to understand the barriers to people's participation so that we could address them directly. And then we wanted to develop social strategies specifically that increase participation. And all that stuff informs the design of our toolkit. And then finally, we are piloting this work this summer in 2 specific sites in Toronto. So as part of that, we're targeting specific populations. So this is a map of Toronto that's not super easy to see, but Toronto's broken down into wards, which we have data on specifically around the travel habits. This is showing the cycling mode share across Toronto. That green area at the bottom, surrounded by that yellow area, is what you would consider the downtown dense urban core, whereas the red is suburban surrounding GTA, which amalgamated with Toronto to form the Greater Toronto Area. And so we see the highest rates of cycling, not unexpectedly, in the downtown dense urban core. Rates as high as, neighborhoods in Portland even. So Toronto is really a cycling city in these wards. Doesn't have the reputation of being such, I would say. And again, who cycles? Who are these people that are cycling? Understanding this demographic. What we can see across Toronto with a broad stroke is that it's predominantly male, 66% male, whereas all other mode share is very equal along gender. But the interesting thing to note here is as you're moving into the downtown core, out of the red into the green, with higher mode share for cycling, you actually see that it approaches gender parity in these areas. So what we're learning from that is that more women cyclists are helping to bolster these areas that have higher rates. They can be a really important target for behavior change interventions in terms of providing safe streets. And this is, again, information that we hear anecdotally. I'm actually someone who worked in the bike industry consulting on these topics with bike stores in North America, and I've done that for the past few years. And anecdotally, this is what you hear back from stores that want to target commuter markets. They want to focus specifically on women. This is, from a retail perspective, an underserviced market that doesn't get a lot of focus from the bicycle industry, and stores are now coming out that are explicitly trying to do this and focus on the commuter woman cyclist and what are her needs specifically. If we look at age, again, on this issue of demographics, we see that these red lines are actually showing across other mode shares, and the blue is specifically cycling. So we can see that the curve there is skewed a little bit younger, the majority being between ages 25 and 55. The trip characteristics of cyclists compared to other mode shares, generally most trips are under 3 kilometers, and 75% of all cycling trips are under 5 kilometers. The cycling trips that when people are cycling, they generally take 2 to 3 trips per day. So if we're talking about commuter cycling, which is what this data is from, you can actually see evidence of trip chaining. So people who are incorporating other activities into their commuter activity, using the bike, stopping off to pick things up along the way. This is a lot of information with these maps, and I don't think it's worth explaining all of it. What I want to highlight is that when you look at other modes in Toronto, there is almost half of all of the trips by car are under this critical point of 5 kilometers. So we see a lot of opportunity there to shift mode from people who are taking their car around to taking their bicycle. So I think that's a really interesting thing to consider, and these maps don't highlight it, But a lot of that happens in the downtown core where we already see this group effect and we have these social norms that you see cyclists on the road. We have an opportunity to identify champions and sort of foster that behavioral adoption through modeling. Moving on to the design of our toolkit, we approached it in a very specific way. Since there wasn't a strong, rigorous metric or a lot of studies that showcase specifically how you can create a large amount of behavior change, we wanted to look at all the behavior change principles that we've seen across different domains and matrix them against the cycling initiatives that we've seen in the literature and see where we've had successes specifically on what areas, and then take that information and integrate it into a sequenced set of tools that work along the spectrum of behavior change from the beginning adoption through the maintenance of that behavioral adoption. Some of the key messages from the literature that I think are really important are that information-based campaigns or strictly information-based campaigns don't lead to significant behavior change, and I'm sure this is something that a lot of you know already. But one thing that I think is really important, that's the second point, is that fear is constructed with the prevalence of cycling safety programs, which is a strong push for those from a lot of cities, even a lot of community groups. They want to see a lot of cycling safety programs, which intuitively makes sense. Fear is one of the primary barriers to urban cycling. People have a lot of perceived fear around this activity, so you would think that providing safety campaigns would be a useful way of mitigating that fear, but in fact it enhances it. When you're talking about youth, parents' perceptions are significant barriers to their cycling, specifically with cycling stereotypes. These and an individual's attitudes are deep-rooted barriers to cycling. So myself, again, with the curly mustache, I might be identified as one of those fixed gear gearheads weaving in and out of traffic and acting all dangerous when really I ride a somewhat jaunty, slow, low-maintenance bicycle. The interconnectedness of the physical environment and individual and societal structures can't be ignored when you're approaching behavior change. You can't just focus on the physical infrastructure as the way to execute it. That's really coming from a place of if you build it, they will come, which isn't a holistic approach when we think about it. And anticipated moments of life change can be really fertile times for changing behavior. So I'm not sure how this necessarily relates to a city's approach to that, but if you are targeting specific populations, understanding the life cycle is really important in identifying these moments of change when people are willing to adopt new strategies to integrate into their lives. So this is a diagram that is out of our toolkit specifically. And to give you a little bit more information on the toolkit, we have listed several options to consider that are at each of these 4 stages as you're approaching a specific intervention program around behavior change. So whether that's at the beginning when you're segmenting target populations, whether it's through the process of working with the community to understand their specific barriers to cycling, when you're using commitment strategies to do so, and that centered part is supposed to reflect things that you can use across stages at any point that are still going to be useful. So this is actually where I come in and where my work comes in, specifically on this project. What we want to be able to do with this toolkit through our pilot projects this summer is to work with our for-profit and not-for-profit repair shops and understand which tools make most sense within a business strategy for them to situate these interventions specifically within their business model. So to have a more social entrepreneurial slant to their approach to the bicycle industry that can then situate behavior change right at a primary entry point for people who have a nominal interest in cycling, who've identified, I want to go into a bike shop today. If they're doing that, that's a step in the right direction, and we want to really be able to capture these people. And again, I'm going to rely on the anecdotal evidence from my past in the bicycle industry. By and large, we don't focus on this market. It's a small industry that's focused on selling high-end sports vehicles to wealthy white men. And that's true for, if you go to the trade, like North America's largest bike trade show, Interbike, that's 90% of what you're going to see there. And that's reflected on a trickle-down level at every single bike store that you see that's marketing these sport objects. So as part of that, we're also looking to develop tools for people who, for community organizations, I should say, to help inform their business improvement associations on the spending power of cyclists as a specific market, again, or demographic. So there's amazing information that has been coming out of New York City on the installation of bike lanes. I'm going to shift gears and talk about the way that bike lanes have created more cyclists in a specific area, and in doing so, we're able to study the spending habits of cyclists more effectively in those areas. And what it shows is that when cyclists spend their money, they do so along this idea of the 5-kilometer trip. So they're doing so very locally. They're supporting local businesses. They're spending more often, but more importantly, they're spending more than pedestrians or people who are driving cars. And this is a really important argument because a lot of businesses are very adamantly against the replacement of on-street parking in favor of bicycle lanes. If we have solid evidence that cyclists are an important economic driver locally, then that's going to be a really good argument to bring to the table at these community meetings where you want to create and implement the physical infrastructures. So let's brief talk about physical infrastructure. I'm not going to go into these details though, or these ones, but a sense of the data is that this one is really amazing. 50% fewer commercial vacancies at Union Square when these complete street projects were done. So in terms of commercial landlords as an important player in the game of local economy, they need to know that in creating a complete street, you're going to be able to bolster the local economy through the social effects that happen at that level. Moving forward into the pilot projects we're going to be doing, specifically, we are focusing on a high school that has a large population of first-generation immigrant Chinese families. And that is going to happen in one of these downtown wards, specifically because in the downtown wards where we see more cyclists, those cyclists are still generally white and male, by and large. The majority are that. But those people can still provide role models within these wards that we already have high cycling rates, and we're trying to capture that effect there through the piloting of these projects on a new population that we're working with directly through an amazing partner known as CultureLink. It's a settlement agency that works out of these schools that we're partnering with and already runs bike-related programming. And this is maybe too complex to explain or worth explaining right now, but it reflects the way we're approaching the project, which I think is really incredible, talking so much about community engagement like Jennifer was speaking about. That is really informed. I mean, we're a partnership-based research agency, so we really rely heavily on our partners for understanding what we're talking about and who we're talking to. But this diagram is meant to reflect the approach there. We have a bunch of amazing partners specifically around the pilots, more partners that are separate from them, but around the pilots, I mean, these partners do amazing tiny activities specifically in and of themselves, and what we want to offer to them is the ability to link their programming together, still be autonomous agencies, still be autonomous stores that do group rides or capacity building and teaching how to fix bicycles. But we want to be able to link all of these amazing activities together so that we're capturing people a lot in a stronger way. If they don't have success in one specific entry point, there's a whole bunch that they now know about that they can go and try it out there. They can try a group ride with a different group of people. Really a try-it-on mentality is tapped from that. And what we're bringing to the table for them then is the ability to inform and provide staff to help them measure their own activities. So that's what we really have to offer as a research agency is the chance and the materials and the resources for them to measure their own programming, which they've identified themselves as something that's valuable. So some conclusions. I mean, this was a short presentation. I don't feel like I have to go over everything that I said, but the the thing that we really want to hit home is that when you're looking at cycling and active transportation, there should be a holistic approach that doesn't only account for physical infrastructure. You need to understand the social players that are going on that can help you increase cycling volume, and that's what our toolkit is set to do. It's set to be a sequenced series that you can choose from, pick and choose from, or again, find a community group that's doing one of these activities, work with them to create a circular tool that informs all the stages of behavior change. Cyclists are strong economic accelerators at the local level, and businesses can see these developments in their local communities in support of cyclists as a way of driving local economic activity and increasing competitiveness, specifically in the bike industry. A focus through this toolkit provides them the opportunity to serve an underserved market, which is entrepreneurship in a nutshell. And I think that is about it. And we have some references here that you can look at when you get the presentation later. But thank you so much.